Welcome back to Screen View Mirror. I'm your host, Emma, and you're listening to Screen View Thoughts. On this episode, I am delighted to welcome a new guest to the podcast. Mitch, hello, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good.
Awesome. So Mitch from Charlie.Calf on Instagram has joined us here today to discuss Klimov's 1985 war film masterpiece, Come and See. So on this episode of What Made the Film, that is what we're going to be talking about. I guess I'll start with like a quick summary of the film as usual. And needless to say, spoiler alert. So if you haven't seen this film, go and watch it. Okay, so it chronicles the life of, not the life, but the extract, if you like, of a boy's life who goes off to war to fight the Nazis in Belarus in World War II, Nazi-occupied Belarus. And yeah, you see kind of like the progressive coming of age in a very sober kind of way. I'm sure, Mitch, you would agree. If there's anything you want to add to that, that's basically the idea of the story. It I think starts in 1941, 1942, sometime after Operation Barbarossa, and then all the way up to pretty much the end of the war. Yeah.
Yeah. It spans a pretty wide amount of time, which is, and it does it in such an interesting way, which I don't think I've ever seen in any type of movie before watching Come and See and after. So I don't know. I think it's a very special film for a lot of different reasons.
Absolutely. I think it's my favorite war movie. I mean, I did a double podcast episode on Kubrick and war, and even though he has some really good films in that department, I mean, Come and See it's just a game changer for the genre, I think.
Yeah, I mean, before I watched Come and See, the only really war movies I had seen before Come and See were like 1917, Dunkirk, which are all really great in their own respect. And it's interesting because 1917 took a lot from Come and See.
Yes.
Cinematography-wise, but it was such a game changer because I don't know, I saw the poster on Letterboxd and I was like, oh, that looks really interesting because it's just Floria's head. Yeah. And you can't see text in it. And I was like, I need to watch this, and I was not prepared.
Yes, it is the film is definitely an experience. It uses the techniques really well. Like, just to go back to what you were saying on 1917, I feel like, it's kind of inspired from Come and See and also Paths of Glory. I don't know if you've seen it. It reminded me a lot of Paths of Glory, especially the scenes with the trenches. But anyway, we're not here to talk about any other war movie other than Come and See. So to get back on to what made this film, I think, honestly, the acting for me. I know it's difficult, especially with the What Made the Film segment. Like, yes, definitely certain cinematic aspects work together to make a film. That goes without saying. But I think it was the acting, because the transformation of the character and the facial expressions and the real, the close-ups on characters' faces, and the fact that the 180 rule just did not exist in this movie, and I liked that. I liked that. It was just really incredible acting.
Yeah, and the main actor, Floria, I'm forgetting his real name, but he was just fantastic. Yes. I don't think I've seen any performance like that, and it also he went through literal hell while making the film, which just adds to.
And he was 16. He was 16 to act like that at that age. It's just, I mean, it's incredible. Yeah. It goes beyond just raw talent. It really is incredible, and just the way the acting made you feel unsettled. I mean, oh wow! And aside from the acting, I would also say there was really good use of sound, very original use of sound in this film.
Yeah, I was talking to some friends earlier, and we were talking about how much even though there's a lot of discourse about the film, or recently there's been a lot of discourse, I don't think people nearly talk as much about how integral the sound design is for the film itself, because there's no really score to the film. There's a scene where they're in the mud and they're like trudging through the mud, and the sound design is just ominous, kind of eerie sounds, and there's like some kind of distorted classical music over it, and I think it's kind of like a collage of sounds that really makes it feel kind of hallucinatory or surreal, and just kind of it adds to how terrifying the film is.
Absolutely. And I think it also adds to the disorientation that the soldiers themselves felt during wartime. So, like, they couldn't see properly, they couldn't hear properly. There's this moment with, I think, following the bombs, the shell shock attacks, where Floria could not hear, and you couldn't hear with him. That's the thing with POV, you know? You think it's, okay, you have the camera from the character's perspective, but it's not just about the camera. POV isn't just about seeing, it's also about hearing, feeling, etc. And I think that holistically, POV is used very, very well in the film.
Oh yeah, for sure. And you hear like a faint ringing, and you kind of realize that's like Floria's entire like POV. It's so terrifying. And he's 16, and you kind of like see, you know, this the Germans walking through the forest, and you're kind of like disoriented. You don't know really what's going on. It's also sudden, and it's also like when he goes into the camp they set up at the beginning, where they're all getting ready to march on and go forth to go fight. You're kind of, the second you get there, it's all these loud noises and a lot is happening, and you just see Floria, and he's just kind of looking around, and you know, he's seeing so much, and so much is just getting thrown at you at once. It's really it really distorts your senses.
And speaking of distortion and not necessarily ambiguity, but the fact that things don't quite fit very well. I think at certain points of the film, they're using like a dioptic lens or a dioptic, however you call it, like where you have double lens focus, and it's like two separate objects are in focus, except the screen is a little bit split. And you see that throughout the points of the film. It's not done perfectly, because at the end of the day, this is still 1985, but it's done in a way that, okay, even if it's noticeable and not technically accurate or perfect, you get that kind of distortion and that loss of orientation that the soldiers must have felt during wartime. And another cool symbolic thing is when he shows up at the camp at the start of the film, you know, he's smiling, there's no mud or blood on his face, and he's wearing a suit that's kind of like oversized on him. So it kind of, to me, that was a nice little addition, like a nice metaphorical, symbolic addition to say that the clothes are so big on him to emphasize how much of a child he is and how he's not ready to fill the shoes or uniform of a soldier, and how theoretically everyone's too young to fight. You know, no one should have to die during a war. And so that was a nice addition, I think.
Yeah, when I was rewatching it, I forgot how happy he is at the beginning.
Exactly,
like,
yeah.
Even when he's given extra roles and extra duty, he gets even happier, because he really wants to be part of something larger, which is kind of ties into, you know, the coming of age story. But it really surprised me, because I remember it being like he was happy, but I don't remember him like he was smiling the entire way. When his mom, you know, was crying and, you know, begging him not to go, and she brings the axe, he's still laughing and joking around, and I kind of forgot about that, and it was really interesting to see how it was honestly very disturbing, I think, on the rewatch, knowing what happens and seeing how happy he is. But it was interesting to see how he's oblivious to what's going on and what's going to happen, and all he knows is that it's some part of something larger.
Exactly. I think, I completely agree. And aside from the whole transformative aspect of like, okay, he grew up maybe a little bit too much in the wrong direction too fast.
Yeah.
But it's like, yes, every generation wants to feel like they're a part of something, like they're a part of a community, like they belong to something or someone that goes beyond themselves. And I also think that's why the interwar generation was coined, I think, by Hemingway as a lost generation, because it's like, well, in between, World War I and World War II, there felt like this existential loss of purpose and this lack of belonging, and that explains of course, the pre-Depression era frivolities of the 20s. That it's so human. I think that's what all movies share in common. There's a human aspect to this kind of storytelling, and when it comes to the war genre, I mean, it's very, very evident in a very somber way.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've found with a lot of really Russian war movies from, I think, about, let's say, the 50s to the 80s, have a lot of parts where it's like a kid, like a young person, who's it's following them going through, the war, the atrocities, kind of, having what should be, what they should be doing at the time, living a normal teenage life or what have you. But they're living that through the war experience, like Ivan's childhood.
Yeah.
And this one, even the main character is a little bit older, but Ballad of a Soldier, he's finding love in the war.
Yeah.
And it's connecting war and this thing we see is like, like an atrocity, awful, and it's kind of connecting it to us and the human experience.
And that, I think, brings a very important question, which is, how do we justify the experience of war? Like, after the war is over and we're continuing with our lives and we're moving on in history, obviously we're producing art as we go along, and how do we use that art to not just tell the story, but to somehow give consolation, I think, to the families who lost, their loved ones, etc. Like, how do we justify what happened and how do we make sense of what happened? And I think focusing on one character, especially if it's like this young, kind of naive turned disillusioned character, really, it makes it into a story that's not just about a soldier, but about the soldier.
Yeah, because I think I'll talk more about it when we get closer to talking about the end of the movie. But I think it follows Floria through a fair bit of time, and it's following, his journey through the atrocities of, the Nazis and warfare. Even though there's not actually a lot of warfare in it, which is interesting, but it's following him going through that, and at the end, we're kind of shown that it's just, a little small part of something so much larger. And I think as we move on and get farther away from the event that took place in World War II, we kind of start to forget it a little more. And I think that's like an integral and a large part of Come and See, about how we have to look at it. We have to, see the atrocity. So we, don't commit again. Because I was watching an interview with the actor who played for Floria, and he was saying the reason the movie was made was so that no more wars are fought, which it was really sad because he was there, like they had people that were in Belarus at the time of the Durlanger Brigade. That's the brigade that burned all the people.
Right.
But they were all there on set, and it was kind of interesting because most of those people really had no chance before to really tell and show their story. And I feel like part of it, people up until the 80s weren't really, especially right after the war, weren't really interested in hearing more about the atrocities of the war. It was kind of, it was like after World War I, where, everyone wanted to party. Nobody wanted to, kind of sit and reflect on the war. Everyone wanted to go into the roaring 20s. And,
right.
And with, especially right after World War II, after all these things happened, people just wanted to, enjoy life and relax a little. And it was almost like for a few years, all these people were just forgotten. All these atrocities were just not that talked about. There was even like game shows which reconnected, people who had been separated during World War II. And that was like the 50s way of kind of like looking back at the war, which was it's really weird to look at now, but it's kind of like it was hard for people to really grasp the horrors of what had happened. And I think that Come and See really grabs hold of what happened during World War II and the horrors of it, and the entire, not the entire experience, but an experience of one person that can be universally put onto most people's coming of age. And I think it was important for, not only Belarus to reflect, but for the world to reflect on that this did happen. This happened to people not so long ago. So I think that's another reason why Come and See is so important.
Yeah, because watching Come and See in 2021 is very far off of kind of today's reality. And, since then, Germany has become a completely different country, reunification, etc. The Soviet Union fell apart. But 1985 was still a time that was recent enough for, I think, such a display of such a story to be told, to be very, sensitive and relatively recent. People who fought in the war, if they didn't die in the war, were likely to also be alive in 1985, more likely than today in any case. So, I completely agree.
We are like as close to the making of Come and See right now as the making of Come and See was to World War II and the events that took place in the movie. So it was a lot more recent, which I think is important because they were able to have, people that were there during the atrocities and partisans and people that, experienced World War II firsthand and who were able to translate their experience onto the screen. And I think that's important so that we, who are fairly separated from World War II, can look back and kind of see it as almost this, it's almost like an artifact of what we in 2021 can look at in 1940 and kind of not connect to, but see ourselves in.
Yeah, and apply to the sort of human aspect of ourselves. Because if you take a high school history class and you learn about World War II, you're learning dates and names and numbers, but you don't feel the history. And that actually raises the question of, well, how should we study the past, right? Because you might get more information out of a history textbook than you do from this film, but I think in terms of feeling and living and kind of understanding the story part of history, then it's a different question, I think. So it's definitely important to combine that human aspect with all the factual numbers and stuff that we get when studying the past. Yeah,
it's really amount to anything next to the real thing. And I think even Come and See, as horrific as it is, we really can't even understand what the actual event was like because it was so horrific. But yeah, I think stats and names can't really add up to anything close to the seeing what actually happened.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, the film is called Come and See It. It's not called Come and Relive This Atrocity with us. But it is an invitation into the past, I think, and it does it very well. And it also, I think you mentioned this before when we were speaking about the film outside of this podcast episode, but you said that it makes a very good point for films which are considered war movies and considered to be kind of, horror, but as horror as entertainment. It makes the point to say, well, war films don't necessarily have to be entertaining. They're not all and this certainly was not entertaining to watch. It was difficult to watch. The mud scene, which kind of like represented the struggle for war and life, and just the close-ups and the acting. That is why I think it made the film. The acting and those 180 rule-breaking close-ups just really, really, they were very unsettling to watch.
Yep, staring dead into the camera, and it's so good, but I think it was Truffaut who said something like, war movies in itself can't be anti-war movies because war is entertaining, and I think that Owen Kilmov really proved him wrong there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, shall we move on to talking about the end of the film, unless there's anything you'd like to add?
No, I think we can.
Okay. Well, the end of the film kind of... I'm talking about the actual, like, just the very end where they go back in time with the newsreels of Nazi propaganda and stuff. I mean, that raises a very interesting question. Would you kill baby Hitler?
Yeah. It's that might be my favorite part of the movie, even though there's a lot of parts, but that question comes up every few years, and I remember seeing a joke review on Letterboxd saying something like, "This is the longest would you kill baby question." I mean, I think there's some truth in that, because I think he's shooting the photo that says Hitler the Liberator. He's shooting it, and he's getting, and he's pushing back fascism. He pushes back when they were burning the books. He pushes back the beer hall push. He pushes back, the Roaring Twenties, World War I. You even hear the Wagnerian music, right? Because Richard Wagner. Yeah.
Exactly.
And he's pushing back, and then he gets to Hitler in World War I. He gets to Hitler as like a teenager, and then he hits the photo of baby Hitler, and he stops, and he puts his gun down, and he doesn't shoot, and it's almost surprising, but it really made an impact on me, because it was so powerful, and it was so almost bizarre after seeing what had happened, what Floria had just lived through, what he saw happen to that village, and he still didn't go through to shoot baby Hitler. And that left a big impact on me. It's the would you kill baby Hitler question comes up every few years. I remember seeing a Vox video on it a few years back, and people always have a hard time answering the question, because it's one, somebody, if it wasn't Hitler, somebody else most likely would have taken place, because I think it was kind of also in the newsreel showing, how the Treaty of Versailles and, the reparations and the Rhineland and all this stuff kind of led to, and the Great Depression all led to this monster being made, and it was kind of, people just let it happen, nobody really did anything until Hitler invaded Poland, right?
Czechoslovakia, I think, but yeah.
Oh, yeah, no, because they were, I think Chamberlain was allowing
appeasement, so they were like allowing Hitler to more or less do what he wanted, but then there was like this major kind of like, okay, Hitler, stop, but then it was sort of too late, and then World War II broke out. But I think the ending of the question, like the would you kill baby Hitler question, raises a lot of interpretations that we can have, not necessarily just of the movie, but of the way we study history in general. Like, how useful is it to ask what if when we know what was? But even so, is it right to say that, okay, we'll do anything it takes to stop or prevent atrocities? Because what if it takes an atrocity to prevent an atrocity? And that's kind of what stopped Floria, I think, in the moment from killing baby Hitler, because he realized, hold up, if I do this, I become the next Hitler. Like, well, not in strict literal terms, but, morally speaking, if you kill a baby who at that point hadn't done anything wrong, then you are not a good person. So,
he's killing the person that unleashed this terror, but before they had unleashed any terror, he kind of thinks, I would be just as guilty to kill this baby as they are, in a way. Not like, as you said, not literally, but,
Because then still there's a statistical discrepancy, but, and it's a very interesting question that is difficult to answer, I think, but it does give the film a kind of opening toward the end that you wouldn't expect, I think. Because if the point was just to chronicle the story of a boy who went through war and it kind of ruined his life, okay, we get it. But that conclusion, which sort of opened the river into the ocean, I'd say, in terms of meaning and interpretation, that was something very nice that I appreciated about the film. Yeah.
Yeah, it might just be my Western view of like just watching big blockbusters all the time, but I totally expected the ending just to be, they go and they win the war and that's like it. But that wasn't it. It was, him going through the newsreels, pushing back history, and then there is no there is a satisfactory ending, but like there's no really end to the movie. They're fighting they just go on. That's just one event in a war with thousands upon thousands of events, and they go on to the next part of the war, and they march more, and it's just like, you're just like, oh God, if that was one part, it's impossible to perceive what it would be, what it was like, and they're marching, and they march into winter, right? And that's when everything changed in the war. But yeah, they march all year round, and they didn't stop fighting until they had beaten the Nazis. But I think that's what makes Come and See so scary. That ending made it so horrifying to me, at least, because it's like this is only one part. Yeah, and this part was hard for us to watch. But as hard as it was for us to watch, people lived through that, and I think that's what really makes it like one of the scariest movies like ever.
Yeah. I think, unless you have anything else to add, I think I can end on a poetic note, because when I was watching the film, it really reminded me of Wilfred Owen's 1921 poem about World War I, which I think applies very much to this war, or wars in general, called Dulce Et Decorum Est. So if you'd like to add anything, now's your chance, because I think...
I was just going to add one more thing.
Okay, yes, go ahead.
The only other film I've seen from Kilmov was a film called Welcome No Trespassing, and I watched it about a month after watching Come and See, and I was like, what's going on? Because it's so different, but it's also a coming-of-age story, and I think closer to the end I realized, oh my God, there's a lot here that was kind of put in Come and See, but such a different way, this coming-of-age story. Okay. And it was so interesting how he kind of evolved, because it's pretty much Moonrise Kingdom, but like a Russian version. And I found it so interesting how Kilmov kind of evolved over time to make Come and See. And his wife made a movie called The Ascent, which is fantastic, and I could see a lot of that put into Come and See as well. So I think it was really also a culmination of all these events that had gone through his life that led into making Come and See. That's very interesting. I haven't seen those films, but I will definitely check them out. Yeah, The Ascent.
Yeah, sorry?
No, I was just saying The Ascent's amazing. It's another one of those war movies that's just incredibly hard to watch, but so beautifully crafted.
Right. And I think that's the best thing that you can do with a war movie, to make the viewer feel the experience of war rather than to make it entertaining or sad or anything like that. Like with Full Metal Jacket, I think it was the feedback that most people give about that film is that the first part is fun, it's nicely paced, it's interesting. The second part kind of drags out for too long and it's boring. But that's exactly the Vietnam War. Like, that was the experience. You go train for it. It's sort of fun, relatively speaking. And then it's like you go into the war and you're just stuck there. And it drags out for too long. And you don't know why you're there. And it seems a little bit meaningless, like literally the second half of the film. So I think Kubrick did very well on that. And it's... Yeah. Anyway, but that was just a side note there. But yeah, so to end on this kind of note, if you want to add anything else, go ahead. But
I think we've covered a good bit of Come and See. I think we did a pretty good job.
Awesome. So I do want to read out this poem. It's not too long, but I think it'll wrap everything up quite nicely. So Wilfred Owen wrote this in 1921, following the First World War, and it is definitely applicable to the story of Come and See and to World War II in general. So it's called Dulce Et Decorum Est. Bent double like old beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags, we cursed through sludge, till on the haunting flares we turned our backs, and toward our distant rest began to trudge. Men marched asleep. Many had lost their boots, but limped on, bloodshot. All went lame, all blind, drunk with fatigue, deaf even to the hoots of gas shells dropping softly behind. Gas, gas, quick, boys! An ecstasy of fumbling fitting the clumsy helmets just in time. But someone still was yelling out and stumbling and floundering like a man in fire or lime. Dim through the misty panes and thick green light, as under a green sea I saw him drowning. In all my dreams before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. If in some smothering dreams you too could pace behind the wagon that we flung him in, and watch the white eyes writhing in his hanging face like a devil sick of sin, if you could hear at every jolt the blood come gargling from the froth-corrupted lungs, obscene as cancer, bitter as the cut of vile, incurable sores on innocent tongues, my friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory, the old lie, dulce et decorum est, pro patria mori. So that was I think there's a lot to analyze in that poem, but everyone who has made it this far in the podcast episode could do that in their own time. But yeah, like the marching, the old line, that was a reference to, I think, Horace, where he was like this Roman poet, and the idea is dulce et decorum est pro patria mori. It is sweet and fitting to die for one's country, but as the film that we reviewed today shows, it is not that sweet.
It is not. It's not as gloriful as the illusion is to seem that it is.
Exactly. So, I think with that we can wrap up the podcast episode. Unless there's anything you wish to add, by all means. There's no time limit necessarily on these things. So.
No, I think that ending was perfect. I think that poem really weirdly sums up Come and See very well.
Right? Doesn't it? And it's so weird because it's referring to a war which didn't even happen before the poem was written. But so, like, I used the poem to refer to a war that hadn't happened when the poem was written. So it's a bit of a shame because it's like, oh, we didn't learn from World War I, but okay. Anyway.
So many people sacrificed their lives for their country in, both wars, and I think it's, you said the poem was made before World War II, but it's like, it's just become such a tradition of, dying for one's country, that it is applicable throughout all of history.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much for joining the podcast series and for discussing what made the film on this Come and See edition. And I hope to welcome you soon back onto the podcast. But as for the rest of you, keep watching movies, keep reflecting on cinema, and reflecting cinema to others. This was Screenview Thoughts.